It's almost 7 o'clock.
Okay.
You got like
It is
12
almost.
seconds.
Okay. 12 seconds. Okay. 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 Come on, everybody. Let's go
Wait.
to debate text. Okay. Wait. What are we
Now we
waiting for?
have now we have 12 seconds. Okay.
Okay, great. Let's go to let's go to the debate text chat.
Debate text
Where is
chat.
it? No, not the text chat. I'm sorry, the debate voice chat. Where is
We're in
it?
the debate voice chat, girlfriend.
We are? Oh.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. All right, cool.
All right, RIB, mute up.
Okay.
There we go. All right, Esther, whenever you're ready,
And
you can start recording.
oh shit, I forgot I'm recording. I have it already set up, but I forgot I'm gonna do that. Okay. The debate will start, well, the recording will start in however freaking long it takes me to open this up. Okay. It's gonna start three, two, one. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 19th episode of the iDebate server. I'm the moderator for tonight's debate, Queen Esther, and the topic will be does the Christian worldview correspond with reality? Arguing in the affirmative is the Christian apologist and former youth minister, MrBATMAN. And arguing in the negative is the atheist activist and credential theologian, King Xerxes. Each debater will be given a 5-minute opening argument. After each debater has given their opening, they will then have 10 minutes to rebut their opponent. After the rebuttals, they will then have 20 minutes of open dialogue, asking each other questions with as minimal interruptions as possible. After the dialogue, they will both offer a 5-minute closing. This will conclude the debate, at which point we will allow audience members to connect and ask questions to the debaters. The debaters will only answer questions they are directly asked, so if you wish to hear both people answer, make sure to address them both. The Q&A will last 30 minutes. After this 30 minutes has expired, the recording will stop so any further discussion between the debaters or the audience will not be included in the YouTube upload. The rules are quite simple. The debaters will not be allowed to go over time during their opening or they will be muted. The rebuttal, however, will be given 15 to 20 seconds of overlap since the debaters will likely be creating it as we go along. The open dialogue will be as free as possible, and while the debaters are restricted from directly insulting one another at any point during the exchange, profanity will be censored as long as no one is using it gratuitously. If the conversation between debaters becomes incoherent, I, the moderator, will intervene to bring it back to the point at hand. The closing will also last for no more than 5 minutes, or the debaters will be muted. During each phase of the debate, I will let the debaters know when they have 1 minute left, 30 seconds left, 10 seconds left, and if they're still talking after their time expires, they will be muted and we will move on to the next phase. The audience is allowed to utilize the debate text chat to fact check the debaters and deliberate the conversation amongst themselves. However, you will not be allowed to connect until the Q&A, at which point a queue will be initiated for you to join if you wish to ask questions. If both debaters understand and agree to the rules, we will go ahead and begin. MrBATMAN, since you are arguing in the affirmative of the motion, you will be given your opening argument first. You may start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I am MrBATMAN. I'm a Bible believing Christian. I believe the Bible is true and correct right from the very first verse where it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," right to the very last word of Revelation where it says, "Amen." Now, before I go any further, I want to make notice, now you guys can't see it, but I'm actually recording as well. And on my recording, they can see my video. And I'm actually wearing purple to honor Lupus Awareness Month because my wife has lupus. And again, this is one of those things that we need to try and find a cure for. Now, why do I say that right in the beginning of my arguments? Because, again, the Christian worldview is the only worldview that can make sense of why anything at all in the physical world exists, good, bad, or ugly. Because when we're talking about these things that we actually experience inside the real world, and again, let's go ahead and let's start with some definitions. What is truth? What is knowledge? How do we know that we're experiencing things? All these things must be understood from a perspective that allows us to be able to come to a reasoning ability. And that in all of this ability to reasoning, every bit of our reasoning has necessary preconditions. So, once again, I go back to the lupus thing. Why do I address that? Well, it's something that's close to my heart because it does exist. We know people in this physical world that have physical ailments. My wife, lupus. My dad has had heart problems. My mother died of cancer. But wait a minute. All these things exist in the physical world. What makes best sense of these terrible things that happen in this world? Now, most people on my side of the coin are going to first jump right to all the good evidence. And again, everything is evidence for God. There's no bad evidence for God. But they're going to jump to the easy things like the complexity of the eye and things of this nature. But I don't want to go that way first. I want to go the opposite direction. I want to zig instead of zag, whatever you want to look at it, however you want to look at this particular maneuver. But I want us to look at how we can explain these type of things that are bad. How do we explain these things that show us that we are finite, that we are temporal, that we are beings that have a beginning, a finite beginning, and that we will have an end? Now, right there, anything that is finite cannot come from the finite. Whatever is finite ultimately has to come from the infinite. Bang, right there, we've got some really serious things to consider. Also, when we think about time, space, and matter itself, because this is where we live, this is where we exist inside of time, space, and matter. Okay? Where does that come from so we can know that we exist? Oh, wait a minute. Oh, no. Here we go. Now we have got to know what time, space, and matter is. Okay, golly. Not only do we have to try and justify where time, space, and matter comes from, but we got to justify why it works the way it does and how we can know it. Uh-oh. I'm hearing some stuff in the background. I'm sorry.
Oh, dear. Where is that coming from?
It's the rhythm bot.
So sorry.
That's all right.
I don't know who did that.
No problem. So once again now, and I don't know how much time I got left, but I tend to ramble anyway. But again, what we're talking about is everything in the physical world, including knowledge itself, cannot be explained without the Christian God. I'm going to quote some scripture here real quick. All the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden in Yeshua HaMashiach alone, Jesus the Messiah. So my standing point, my starting point, my basic foundational argument is that you cannot know anything to be true without him. In John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. That's a process, except through me. What's Jesus doing here? He's actually quoting Psalms 119, verse 160, where he says, the sum of your word is truth, and all of your righteous rulings endure forever. You see,
you have about a minute left.
Thank you. Yeah, you see, what we have here is we have time, space, matter, knowledge, truth, logic, mathematics. We got all these things that we can talk about, and none of them can be explained without first appealing to the one true God of the Bible. His name is Yahuwah, Yahweh. You might know him by his Roman name, Jesus. I concede the rest of my time. Thank you.
Okay. King Xerxes, you can start whenever you're ready.
Give me just a second. Hold on, where's he at? Found him. Okay. Wandering Soul was the one who put the rhythm bot in here, so he has now been removed from the server for that gratuitously rude interruption, and I am ready to begin, so you can start my time. Okay. In this debate, I will be demonstrating that the Christian worldview does not correspond with reality. To do so, I believe it is important to establish what the Christian worldview entails. First and foremost, I should point out there are nearly 40,000 different denominations of Christianity in the world, and many of them hold mutually exclusive theological positions. So what is the Christian worldview? I believe the best answer to this is the following. First assertion, the God of the Bible exists. The second, the Bible is the word of this God given to man to communicate his directives. Third assertion, Jesus Christ was a real person. Fourth, Jesus Christ was the incarnate of God, or God come in the flesh. Fifth, Jesus Christ was crucified and died. Sixth, Jesus Christ rose again after 3 days. Seventh, Jesus Christ's death served as the atonement for human sin, all human sin. Eight, Because of the sacrifice, man can achieve salvation by accepting Jesus Christ as Lord and thereby receiving his gift of eternal life in accordance with John 3:16 and Romans chapter 4 verse 5. These 8 assertions are the bedrock of Christian doctrine and therefore can be reasonably established as the universal Christian worldview. Now the question remains, do they correspond with reality? I contend they do not. The first assertion is that the God of the Bible exists, not just any generic deity, but specifically the personal and defined God of the Old Testament. This God does not correspond with reality due to his logically inconsistent nature. He is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, according to the vast majority of contemporary models for him. If a God truly possessed these attributes, then the universe as we observe it would be logically inconsistent with his existence. An all-powerful God would be capable of creating any universe they could conceive of. If I could conceive of a universe better than this one, so could God. If God could conceive of a universe better than this one, he could create it. If God is truly all good, then he would create it. However, given that any one of us could conceive of something to add or subtract from this universe, which would ultimately improve it, such as taking away the existence of lupus or cancer, we know we are not living in the best possible universe. As such, if a God exists, he cannot be both all-powerful and all-good, which would invalidate the Christian model of God, and therefore the Christian model of God does not correspond with reality. Moving more toward the story of Jesus, we are met with elements of his existence which are intrinsically at odds with reality. For example, it is impossible to walk on liquid water. The very properties of water, in accordance with our reality, forbid objects denser than its molecular structure from resting on the surface. To walk on water would require that the laws of our reality be broken or altered. The very nature of miracles like this demand a separation from reality. This is further compounded with the assertion that Jesus Christ rose from the dead after 3 days. According to John chapter 19, 31 through 34, Jesus was pierced in his side while he hung from the cross. This caused blood and water to flow from the wound, which indicated he bled to death during his crucifixion. In order for Christ to have reanimated, it would have required a violation of the second law of thermodynamics and a reversal of the entropy within his body. Our reality does not allow for the reanimation of dead bodies, especially after they've been drained of the very substance that allows their organs to function. Every law of biology would also need to be violated for this to occur. Therefore, the resurrection of Jesus Christ necessarily does not correspond with reality, which is not something that Christians even deny. It is this violation that permits Christians to label these events as miracles. So if the Christian worldview demands these numerous violations of the laws of reality, how could anyone possibly affirm that the Christian worldview corresponds with reality? Now let's take a look at the Bible, the supposed Word of God. The Bible makes numerous claims about the facts of our reality, which we can demonstrate with reasonable certainty are not true. The global flood never happened. The exodus from Egypt never happened. The annihilation of the Canaanites, as described in the book of Joshua, never happened. Also described in the book of Joshua is the event where God held the sun still in the sky. We know this didn't happen, and we can know this didn't happen because billions of people observed the sun at the same time. If it was held still in the sky, billions of people would have observed this, and they would have recorded this. It would not have happened solely over one particular battlefield in the Middle East. Other events in the Bible, further closer to the New Testament, specifically in Matthew and Luke, contradict one another, which means that at least one of these events, or one account of these events, must be false. If we take a look at the birth narratives of Christ, we see something incredibly disconcerting. In Matthew chapter 2, we're told that Jesus Christ was born under the reign of Herod the Great, who we know died approximately close to the year 4 BCE. While Herod was alive, according to the Gospel of Matthew, he attempted to kill Jesus, and as so, directed his soldiers to slaughter all of the male babies that were aged 2 and under within Bethlehem and the surrounding districts as an
30 seconds left.
But we know that event never happened. It was never recorded anywhere except for the Gospel of Matthew. And the Gospel of Matthew was written nearly a century after this event would have happened. So, in my contention, none of these events match up with reality as we see it, and therefore the Christian worldview does not correspond with reality.
10 seconds.
I yield the rest of my time.
Okay. So both of you used up your time. So now you have 10 minutes to start your rebuttals. Mr. Batman, you can start whenever you feel comfortable.
Okay, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Well, if we're going to be talking about some of these points, so one of the first points you made was denominations and how many of these denominations have mutually exclusive positions. And I would agree with that, sir, but that's not my point. My point is you're either a Bible-believing follower of Messiah or you are not. That's what the Bible teaches. See, I'm sola scriptura. If it's not in the scripture, I don't want any part of it. Now, You also made mention about God's existence, that reality doesn't correspond with God's existence. One of the questions I'm going to put to you in our question and answer time is, what would be the adequate cause of time, space, and matter? Because using the scientific method, we can prove in a number of different methods that all time, space, and matter did have a finite beginning in the distant past. Anything that has a beginning is known as an effect. Every effect must have an adequate cause. So the question to you would be, sir, what would be the adequate cause of time, space, and matter? By definition, that would have to be a timeless, spaceless, immaterial, all-powerful, all-knowing, loving, living, logical, lawgiver God that doesn't change over time. His name is Yahweh, Jesus. Now, another thing you did is said something about that a lot of these people don't accept Jesus and don't have an accepting view of Jesus, sir. Do you know there's many people that don't know the God of the Bible, that even though that they might actually read their Bible, they have been taught traditions that aren't true? Did you know that, sir? As a matter of fact, the Bible even tells us that. The Bible tells us that we have inherited nothing but lies from our fathers. That's the book of Kings and Jeremiah. So we can know this, sir. And so this is why we know that denominations are irrelevant. You don't want to follow a denomination. You don't want to follow a pope. You don't want to follow a pastor. You want to follow the word of the living God. God's word is truth. Jesus is the truth. He is the word, sir. So that's why you want to follow him. Now, you also went off onto something about God making a better universe. Well, sir, the fact of the matter is the universe exists. So the universe exists, and it exists inside of time, space, and matter. Where does time, space, and matter come from so the universe can exist? That's number one. Number two, you appealed to laws of reality, laws of science. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. I love this one, sir. So since these laws of nature, laws of science, we do observe them in the physical world, such as laws of gravity, magnetism, thermodynamics, physics, logic, mathematics, and many more. These laws must have a cause because we observe them in the physical world. So that means they are an effect in our physical world. What causes these laws to exist in the physical world? Number one. What causes these laws not to change over time? Because we can document that they do not change over time, because if they ever did change over time, we wouldn't be here to complain about it. That means we wouldn't have any life. And that's number two. And number three, why are these laws going to be here tomorrow so we can enjoy this entire experience all over again? Now, you also mentioned the second law of thermodynamics. Again, one of my favorite and most well-established laws of thermodynamics. Did I mention that I happen to be a science teacher? And that law of thermodynamics states that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. That's the first law. The second law states that everything decays over time. It actually goes from a state of workable, usable energy to no workable, usable energy. We call this thermal equilibrium, or heat death. This also allows us to know that everything did have a beginning, because anything that is decaying over time, it was wound up to the least amount of entropy possible and is now winding down to the most or maximum amount of entropy possible. We know that it had a beginning and it will have an end. Anything that has a beginning had to have a cause. Anything that has a beginning is known as an effect. Every effect must have an adequate cause. What would be the adequate cause of time, space, and matter? What would be the adequate cause of this law of second law of thermodynamics that causes time, space, and matter to work this way, and this law itself does not change over time? That's kind of important. So we have all these different things we're talking about natural laws, laws of gravity, laws of magnetism, laws of thermodynamics. You mentioned laws of biology. Oh, I'd love to talk to you about that. I mean, when you think about laws of biology, laws of communication, inside your brain, there are more communication connections than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. I want you to think about this. You have transmitter neurons, receiver neurons, and the synapse in which the signal is sent across, which are not in physical contact with one another. So this is a God who wants you to know he communicates. He created a transmitter, a receiver, and an agreed upon language. Which one of those evolved first, and how do you know? Wow, that'll preach right there. But wait a minute. In order for any of this to be true, you have to have eternal, universal, and unchanging laws of logic. See, and if the Bible's not true, you don't have those laws of logic. You see, the laws of logic only come from an eternal, universal, and unchanging lawgiver God. And if you reject the God of the Bible, then I would just simply ask you one question. Since Jesus declares himself to be the truth, and you cannot know anything to be true without him, since he is the truth and all treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden in him alone, then what would be your definition of truth, and how do you know it? Because, again, in order for you to identify truth, you'd have to be able to have the law of identity so you can identify a truth statement and then compare and contrast it with something that is not true. That's the law of non-contradiction. So you're going to have laws of logic, laws of physics, and time, space, and matter to know anything to be true. That seems to be our reality. So our reality is based in and depends upon the Christian worldview. As a matter of fact, whenever you showed up for the argument, sir, you actually lost because you showed up and you stole from my Christian worldview in order to support your false worldview. Basically, here's what you're doing. You're sucking down air, and you're at a debate with me, and you're going against air. You're saying that there is no such thing as air, while the whole time you're sucking down air for your body to survive and putting words in the air for me to hear. And the whole time you're saying there's no such thing as air. Now, are contradictions wrong? Because, see, if contradictions are wrong, here's what you got to get your arms around. Now, in the beginning of the cosmos, in the beginning of all of the physical universe, in the beginning of the universe, could the universe have both existed and not existed at the same time in the same way? You see, when you think about this, think about it. Could the universe in the beginning have both existed and not existed at the same time in the same way? This is the law of non-contradiction. It must pre-exist the physical world. The laws of logic must pre-exist the physical world. They are eternal, universal, and unchanging. And as such, they are not self-explanatory, they are not self-existent, and they sure cannot be your arbitrary starting point because they sure don't explain anything else. Because these laws of logic do not create anything. They simply maintain the status quo of our physical world. Think about this. These are metaphysical laws. Metaphysical means from outside of the physical. These laws come from outside of the physical realm, and they actually dictate what will happen inside our physical world. Why do you think you cannot create a square circle or a round triangle or have a married bachelor? Because these things violate the laws of logic. Why do you think water boils at 212 degrees every single time based on known parameters such as humidity and barometric pressure? Why does it do that? Why is it repeatable? Because we have uniformity of nature. The uniformity of nature and again, the uniformity of nature is the fact that all of the physical world works under uniform, law-like patterns. These uniform, law-like patterns, we call them natural laws, like laws of gravity, magnetism, thermodynamics, and many, many more. You cannot explain where these laws come from without an eternal, universal, and unchanging lawgiver God. Oh, and speaking of that, you mentioned miracles. Miracles cannot be explained without this God that gives us these natural laws that don't change over time. Because we have two types of laws. We have the laws that God created, which he can adjust or do away with if he likes, such as laws of physics, such as laws of chemistry, such as laws of biology. He can do away with those anytime he likes because he created them. But there are certain laws God cannot do away with, and those are laws of logic. Those are laws of mathematics, because these are attributes or properties of the living God. These are how God's mind thinks. This, sir, is why we can know that logic never changes over time, because it is an attribute of the living God. And the reason miracles can happen...
Left.
Thank you. The reason miracles can happen is because that lawgiver God, who is in complete control of all of the physical world, can set aside certain of his laws in order to make himself known. I concede the rest of my time.
Okay, so we have about 45 seconds added to the extra time. JT, King Xerxes, you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, so a lot of assertions there. I'm again focusing on whether or not Christianity specifically corresponds with reality, and we know that the Christian worldview depends on the Bible. And my opponent harped on the laws of logic quite frequently. The laws of logic are merely a reflection of how reality works, and truth is whatever is correspondent with reality. Reality is everything that is real and everything that exists within that. So we all experience it in the same way to a certain degree, which is how we come to consensus conclusions about how reality works. For example, he brought up the boiling point of water. We know that that works, and it's repeatable because we've tested it. Now, in a universe where God exists, especially a personal God, we wouldn't necessarily expect that, because God is devoid of limitation. He's not compelled by anything. He doesn't care how many electrons are in a particular molecule. He doesn't care about the necessity of a biological organism to have blood or to breathe oxygen and to circulate that oxygen. So there's no reason why a God couldn't create us completely independent of how the universe operates and constantly manipulate the laws of physics in a way that we could observe. But that doesn't happen because the universe is devoid of a personal interlocutor. There's nothing controlling the universe. It falls into a pattern, as do all things that are not influenced by an outside force. If the universe's laws were constantly changing, my opponent could just as easily use that as an argument from God for God by saying, "Well, what's changing the laws?" See, there's no way to test these propositions. There's no way to perform predictions that could either support or not support the proposition being offered. In a universe where theism was real, we would expect a lot of things. We would expect life to hold a much larger place in the universe than it does, but we know that it doesn't. Life is very insignificant, and everything, if everything were to die right now, the universe would continue on as if it never existed to begin with. My opponent talks about the laws of entropy, and he uses those to try and argue that there's a beginning to the universe, yet no cosmologist would ever agree with him with that. Because when we say the word beginning, what we're talking about is a rearrangement of pre-existing fundamental particles that are now transposed into a new object that didn't previously exist. But the components of that object did exist. They've always existed, matter and energy. The first law of thermodynamics is that matter and energy can't be created or destroyed, and yet my opponent says, well, they were created and they can be destroyed because God can do it. But he's just a magical, omnipotent panacea that can explain everything without really needing to put your thinking cap on. Of course, you can inject that into any problem and have a deus ex machina, God in the machine explanation, but that actually doesn't serve any testable or any useful function. The explanations that we have about how the universe operates are completely devoid of a God in their application. We don't think about what God might do if a tornado was to come along. We study the storm and try to figure out what properties of our world are going to form a tornado so we can predict tornadoes in the future and avoid their destruction. We don't actually sincerely consider, well, what if God just makes the tornado vanish? That's not a question that we come up with because there's no evidence that could ever happen or that has ever happened. The laws of logic are all the reflections of reality, and we know that the Bible, in the claims that it makes, violates those laws of logic, and the nature of God and his properties also violate the laws of logic. If God can violate the laws of logic, the laws of logic are ultimate, and so they shouldn't be part of the conversation anyway. And a Christian wouldn't be allowed to use the laws of logic because they could change on a whim if there was an omnipotent God that was controlling them. But we know that's not the case because they never change and they never will. And we can use the laws of logic to evaluate truth claims. And one of the truth claims is that Jesus rose from the dead and saved mankind of their sins. We know that people don't rise from the dead. The resurrection of a dead corpse has never happened in all of recorded history, and it never will happen. They are nothing but myths and legends. And we accept that when we're not talking about things that we already believe in. My opponent already believes that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. He starts from that conclusion. But he would never accept that for other people who supposedly rose from the dead, like Julius Caesar or Elvis Presley. We understand those to be legends, myths, things that people made up to explain something that they couldn't previously explain without the use of a supernatural invocation. Anytime we've ever used supernaturals to explain something, we've always come to a naturalistic explanation of it later. For example, again, storms. People always thought storms were the product of a god or some sort of deity, but we know better now. We also thought the wind was the product of a god. We thought that the sun rising in the sky was Apollo carrying his chariot across our skies, and the sun was a wheel on the chariot. The seasons were because Demeter was upset that her daughter lived with Hades, and she was sad half the year when her daughter wasn't with her. So we have the winter and the fall, and then she was happy, and that's when we have the spring and the summer when Demeter and Persephone are with each other. All of these explanations we know fail immediately when we have technology to investigate how these processes actually work, and never have we ever found any God fingerprint, any God component, because an omnipotent God could do whatever he wanted. He would not be confined by the prospects of our reality, but our reality stays the way it is without any outside influence. If God were to reach his hand into our universe, he should reach it out dripping with physics. We would see that disruption, and yet we don't, ever. All arguments from God have to invoke some level of circular logical fallacy. You have to presuppose God from the outset and then make up a bunch of ex post facto justifications for why the universe does not correspond with what we would expect to see if a God existed. We would expect to see that there wouldn't be a bunch of religions if there was truly one omnipotent God that could do whatever he wanted. Everybody should believe in the same God, but they don't. They don't even believe in the same version of that God. My opponent says that denominations are useless and that they're futile and they don't adhere to scripture. And he adheres solely or just by itself scripture. However, we have other Christians in this very server in the world that say they do the same thing, but I guarantee you that if Batman were to get into a conversation with him, they wouldn't agree on what the scripture is saying, on which interpretation of scripture is the right one. That is evidence that there is no supernatural or all-powerful influence into how we're reading these scriptures. Everybody comes to their own conclusion, and these conclusions can be radically different from one another. I'd like to go back to what I was talking about with the book of Matthew and the book of Luke. In the book of Matthew, Jesus is born under Herod the Great, and he is fled to Egypt with his parents because Herod tries to kill him. And they come back to Judea, and they find that Herod Archelaus, which is Herod the Great's son, has began his reign as king since his father's death, and they're afraid of him. They think that he'll carry out his father's mission, and so they flee to Nazareth in the province of Galilee, which is an entirely different kingdom than Judea was at the time. Whereas Luke tells us a completely and mutually exclusive story to that. He says that Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the time when Quirinius was the governor of Syria, but we know that Quirinius didn't become the governor of Syria until 10 years after Herod the Great died. In fact, Quirinius was there to banish Herod Archelaus to Gaul. And so his presence there only occurred well after Herod Archelaus had already been overthrown, yet we're told in Matthew that Joseph and Mary returned to Egypt with an infant Jesus while Herod Archelaus just became king. These two things are mutually exclusive. We have a 10-year discrepancy in the day that or in the year that Jesus was born. So either Matthew or Luke has to be wrong. And if either of them are wrong, then that means the entirety of the Bible cannot be trusted, because we now have impeached the credibility. We have mutually exclusive claims about how Jesus was born. Not only that, but we have mutually exclusive claims in all four Gospels about the discovery of his resurrection. Was it Mary Magdalene, Mary mother of James and Johanna, that discovered the empty tomb? Was it just Mary by herself? Was it Mary and Mary Magdalene by themselves? Was it Mary Magdalene, and Salome? We don't know. Was there one angel? Were there two? Was Jesus in the tomb? Was he outside the tomb? Was he mistaken for a gardener? Was there an earthquake? Was the tomb rolled away before their eyes, or was it already rolled away when they got there? Only one of these Gospels can be correct, but they could all be wrong. And when we have mutually exclusive contradictory claims like this, we can't assume that any of them are correct until we have external evidence to verify one story over the rest. And we don't have that, because the only account we have that Jesus rose from the dead are the gospel narratives themselves, all written decades after this event would have actually happened. These narratives do not correspond with reality. They maintain that a violation of the laws of our reality happened to allow Jesus to resurrect to begin with and allow his miracles to be performed. We cannot reasonably believe that that is correspondent with our reality, because everything that we have within our reality does not allow that to happen, which is what makes them miraculous to begin with. If something happens that doesn't correspond with what we think we know about the world, we would call that a miracle until we can find some alternative explanation. But anytime that's ever happened and we did find an explanation, it was correspondent with reality, and now we can use predictive models to explain
1
how it
minute
happened,
left.
and we can figure out that it does happen in a way that our reality permits, without the outside influence of some omnipotent panacea. We do not see any evidence that this actually happens. With the final minute, I would like to address his claim that the universe had to have a beginning, including time. If there was a time when time didn't exist, that would create a logical paradox. So there can never be a time when time didn't exist, meaning that time can't begin. And time doesn't exist without matter, because if there's no distance, how could you measure a mile? Likewise, if there's no matter, how could you measure time? Because time is how we measure the course of events, and events are related by matter. So no, the universe did not have a beginning in the colloquial way that we would use that word. I yield the rest of my time.
Okay. So we added 1 minute to the 20-minute open dialogue. So you guys can start whenever you are ready.
Okay. Mr. Batman, I'll let you go ahead and start with the questions, because I know you're dying to ask some.
Oh, sure. Sir, you said that we were going to be talking about the Christian worldview, and you keep appealing to things that happened in the past. Now, our Christian worldview should be able to explain things that happened in the past, but when we're talking about evidence for things is in the here and now, the right here and the right now. Would you agree, sir, that we do observe laws of logic in the here and now?
Yes.
Okay. Where do those laws of logic come from, and why do they not change over time?
To ask where the laws of logic comes from is logically tantamount to asking what the color blue smells like. It's an illogical question. They don't come from anything. They're reflections of how reality operates.
Okay, sir. So they simply are a descriptor of reality?
Yes, the laws of logic are descriptive, not prescriptive.
Okay, great. So, why do they describe reality not changing over time? Why does this law exist? Where does it come from? Because, sir, we have to have it in order to have something called classifications of things, categories, and labels. And you have to have this in order to have cause and effect relationships between things. Now, where does this pattern come from, and why do we observe it in the past? Again, this pattern not changing over time.
Because reality doesn't change, and I just explained they don't
Actually,
come from
reality
anything.
does
They are
change, sir.
reflections of reality.
Reality
No,
does change. We have the second law
the
of
way that
thermodynamics.
reality operates, the way that reality operates does not change.
Okay,
It
I agree
adheres
with
to the
that,
same
sir.
patterns.
That's called the uniformity of nature, but reality itself, time, space, and matter, does change. Now, would you agree, sir, that the laws of nature cannot come from nature, that these laws of nature that dictate how nature works, they
They
cannot
don't
come from
come
the
from
natural
anything. They
world?
are reflections of nature.
Okay,
A
sir.
law of nature is a description of how nature operates. It doesn't come
Yes,
from
sir.
anything. The
Okay, great, sir.
laws do
So, but
not
wait a minute. How do you describe where these laws come from?
wait.
How do you
Let me
describe why
finish
the
my
pattern
point.
doesn't change?
Let King Xerxes finish his point. Thank you.
When we're talking about the laws of logic, they are not transcendent things that impose a certain metric of operation on the universe. They are describing how the universe operates, and so far that has never changed. That doesn't mean it couldn't change, but we have no evidence that that could ever happen, and it's a worthless thing to consider because we wouldn't even be able to conceive what that would look like if they did, because our perspective, our perception of the universe is it's exclusively within the realm of the laws of logic and how they operate, but they are reflections. They are not imposed upon the universe.
So, we don't need these laws of logic in order to have the physical world function. Is this correct?
Uh, I don't know the answer to that question because
I
we
do,
can't
sir. I
conceive
teach science. Would
of.
you like to learn a little today?
Don't be condescending. I'm giving you
I'm
an
not,
honest
sir.
answer to the question
You said you
just
don't know.
asked.
I do know. I'm happy to help you, sir. This is where I'm a teacher. This is where I can help you. You see, in order to have the cause and effect relationships in the physical world, you must have the law of identity, or you don't get something called a classification of thing, a category, or a label. So, if you don't have a classification of thing, like let's use our sense of sight. If you don't have a classification of thing, then you won't be able to have a photon. That's a classification of thing. Affect your retina. That's another classification of thing. And send a signal, another classification of thing, to your brain. Another classification of thing. Now, without classifications of things, then you don't have cause and effect relationships, which means you don't have chemical reactions, which means you don't have life. Now, sir, without the law of identity, you don't have life. Biologically
No, we
speaking,
don't
where
have
does the
life
law
as
of
we know it
identity...
because
I'm sorry, I'm not done with my
Batman.
answer, sir. Biologically speaking, where does the law of identity come from so you can have living, functional things?
It doesn't come from anything. It's a reflection of reality. I've answered that question 4 times now.
Oh, so do you believe in the correspondence theory of reality, sir? Justified true belief.
No.
Okay. So what would be your definition of truth then? What is truth and how do you know it?
Whatever corresponds with reality.
Well, you just said that correspondence theory of reality was not your form of T, sir. So which one is it? Are contradictions wrong in your worldview?
Yes,
So why did you just contradict yourself?
I didn't.
Okay, so are you a holder of the correspondence theory of reality, that which
I don't know enough
corresponds with
about that
reality?
I don't know enough about that to say yes, but if the only thing that theory entails is that which corresponds with reality is true, then I would say yeah. But I don't know enough about it to trap myself in that box. I'm not going to.
So let me ask you a question, sir. I think we have a knowledge problem. What is knowledge and how do you know that?
Knowledge is whatever we know.
I'm sorry, sir.
It's,
Do you have
it's
a
a piece
definition
of-
that doesn't use the term in its own definition that makes it a little vacuous?
Knowledge is information that we can download into our minds. You know,
How
if-
about
if
justified
there
true
is the
belief, sir?
mind
Would you agree with
perceiving
that?
it, it's not no.
Would you agree
If
with
you're
a
gonna ask me
justified
question,
true
let me answer-
belief?
If you're going to ask me a
Oh.
question, let me answer the question before you move on to the next question.
Well, sir, I'm trying to give you an answer. Apparently, you don't know what knowledge is. I'm trying to help you understand what knowledge is.
I just explained what knowledge is. It's
No,
information.
sir, you
that we can
didn't.
download
It's
into our mind and know.
incoherent. Would you agree that your knowledge... Let me ask you a question, sir. If I was to tell you that the road outside of my house, the speed limit on that road is 35 miles an hour, and then I turn right back around to you and say, but I could be wrong, do I know it?
Let's make sure we're sticking to the question at hand. Does
I
Christianity...
am. This is about knowledge. This is about knowledge. It's very
All
important.
right.
Again, if I was to
Okay.
tell you that the road outside of my
Don't
house,
argue
the
with the
speed limit
moderator.
is 35 miles an hour, the speed limit is 35 miles an hour, but I could be wrong. Do I know it?
You don't need to have absolute certainty to know something with reasonable certainty.
Okay. How do you know that?
That's just a probably basic belief. It's an axiom.
Oh, so it's an
I can
axiom.
be
Where
reasonably
do
certain of
axioms
something and
exist?
operate. Hold on. I can have reasonable certainty of something because of my experience. Okay, I know something because I experience it to be so, and
Oh.
as long as my experience does not harm me, I can reasonably trust that my experience is correct. Because if
Okay.
my experience weren't correct, then it would punish me for being incorrect. If I thought that the speed limit my
Ah.
road was 110 miles an hour and I went 110 miles an hour and came up on a sharp curve, I would wreck my car and die.
Let me
So
show you. Let me show you the
obviously, an
circularity.
incorrect belief is going to punish me.
Yes, because you have circularity. You're basically reasoning that your senses are valid, and then you're sensing that your reasoning is valid. That's circularity.
If they're not
vicious
valid, I would be
circularity,
dead.
sir, because you cannot know anything out of that vicious circle. And again, sir, we can move on. You said also earlier that
No,
God
I'm not.
was.
Hold on. I'm
Wait.
not.
Yes.
Do you
Batman.
want to move on, Jake?
I don't want to move on because I want to answer that. He's trying to gish gallop me, and I'm not going to let him do it.
Okay.
Fine. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. I can trust that my senses and reason are correct because I am not punished for when I use them. If I am incorrect on something, it will punish me. If I think that I can touch a hot stove and I trust my senses that I can touch a hot stove and I touch a hot stove, it's going to hurt me.
Great.
And it's going to create a physical, objective effect on me that is detrimental to my well-being. So I can trust my senses and reasoning so long as that doesn't happen.
Great. That's the law of cause and effect. Where does that law
It's not the
come
law of
from?
cause and effect.
Yes, it is. Actually, it is, sir. You just actually gave it the law of cause and
is a
effect.
law.
Cause and effect is
Cause
a
and
law.
effect is
It's
a
a
law.
law of science, and
It's
you
not a
can't do
law.
science
It
without
is
the
not a
law of
lie.
cause and effect.
It
Now,
is not a
please,
law,
let's not
and
be
no
ignorant.
scientist would
The
agree
fact
that
of the
it
matter
is.
is,
If
sir, when you're talking
somebody
about
in
the
the
law of
text
cause
chat
and
wants to
effect,
fact check,
you, sir, just said you know
Excuse
that
me.
as long as you don't get
Excuse me.
injured for doing something, everything's
Thank
going
you.
good.
If somebody wants to fact check if the law of cause and effect is an actual law, you can do that in the text chat. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Batman.
Yes. The fact of the matter is, sir, you stated that the law of cause and effect is an actual law. You actually used it, and it's your analogy to say that if, as long as you didn't put your hand on the stove and get burned, see, that would be the effect, getting burned, and the cause would be putting your hand on the stove. See how easy that is? So the law of cause and effect, it's throughout the physical world. Everything in the physical world works under this law of cause and effect. Now, number one, what causes this law to be in the physical world? Number two, what causes this law not to change? Because if it ever changed, we wouldn't be able to do science. We wouldn't be able to know things. And number three, what's going to cause this law to be here tomorrow so we can enjoy this lovely thing all over again?
Okay, so again, cause and effect is not a law in the way that, say, gravity is a law or entropy are laws, because cause and effect is something that we perceive based on our linear understanding of time. This event caused that event, but that's something that we add to the universe that isn't necessarily true.
But you've already established you can't know that.
We understand that at the quantum level, things don't interact the way that they do on the macro level, because cause and effect breaks down when you get down to the quantum level.
Actually, no, sir, they don't. They still function even at the macro.
Are you a quantum theorist?
Actually, I am. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, I'd be happy to help you.
Fantastic.
If you go actually look at what we talk about in what's called the double slit experiment, the observation. I'm sorry, sir.
Let him finish his point, Vicky.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So once again, if you're talking about the double slit experiment, did you know, sir, that the observer actually can affect the outcome of the experimentation at the quantum level? So this is called the observer problem, sir. You might want to look into that. So yes, cause and effect are affected even in the quantum level. So you have cause and effect even at the quantum level.
The double slit experiment proves that there is no omnipotent observer.
Yes, sir. You can go ahead and believe that all you like. The fact of the matter is,
hold on. Let's go through it. Again,
no, I'm not
going to let you.
Where does cause and effect, sir? Cause and effect. Where does cause and effect come from? So you can't have the quantum mechanics without cause and effect. So where does cause and effect come from?
I'm going to respond to your double split experiment because I already told you cause and effect don't come from anything. They're something that we attach to reality based on our understanding of linear time.
You attached it to reality? Are you God, sir?
No, there you go. As humans attach it based on our
we didn't attach anything to reality, sir. We only observe reality. We don't prescribe reality. We only perceive it. You really need to study this a little bit more.
Does color exist? Does color exist?
Mm-hmm. That it does. Color exists. Color exists because it reflects something called a photon to your retina, and it exists in the physical world. It actually can be measured, sir. Did you know we can measure different colors of red? Ooh, did you know that, sir?
Batman, Stop. What if
Did
there
you
was
know we can
nothing to perceive
identify
the
and
photon?
distinguish between the color red and
Batman,
between the
what if there
color
was nothing to
blue?
perceive the
That's the
Hold
photon?
law
on,
of
he's asking
identity
you a
right there.
question. Hold on. King Xerxes just asked you a question.
Yes, go
What if
ahead.
there was nothing to perceive the photon?
Well, how would you know that? Because you can't know anything, sir.
That's a
You have no
hypothetical
knowledge.
question. What if there
Can
was
you tell
nothing
me
to
anything
perceive the
that you
photon?
know and then tell me how you know it?
Batman, stop dodging the question.
I'm not
What
dodging
if
the
there was
question,
nothing
sir.
to
You've
perceive
already
the
admitted
photon?
you can't know anything.
I didn't admit that. That's
Oh, really?
actually
So
a
then
blatant
tell me
lie.
anything that you know and then tell me how you know it.
No, my sister didn't have lunch on the surface of Mars, and I know that because
Great,
it's
sir.
impossible
Did you
for people to
experience
surface of
that
Mars
to
and have
know that
lunch.
for a fact? Because in order for it to be knowledge, it must be justifiable and true. So do you know that for a fact?
Yes,
Great. So where does knowledge come from in your worldview?
I just told you knowledge is information that we download based on our perception of reality.
So we perceive it. If you don't perceive it, it's not true?
If you don't know it, it's not knowledge.
Oh, if you don't know it, it's not knowledge. Is that correct?
If a piece of
If
information
you
is
don't
not
know it,
known,
it's not knowledge. Is that correct?
Batman, if a piece of information is
If
not
you
known,
don't
can't
know
be
it,
knowledge.
it's not knowledge. See, that's not
what I
knowledge.
said. Batman, that's not what I said.
Knowledge is a
If piece of
justified true
information-
belief.
Batman,
Yes.
if a piece of information isn't known, it's not knowledge.
Okay.
The amount of
So
rocks
who has
on
to know it,
Mars
sir?
right now
What
isn't
makes it
known,
knowledge?
Therefore, it's not knowledge.
So if it's data before
Whether you
knowing,
know it.
if it's data, if it's just pure raw data before a person actually physically knows it, is that the distinguishing point when it is known in a human brain
not-
that makes it knowledge? So there's
If
no
any
knowledge.
sentient being
There was
knows
no
it's
knowledge before a human brain. Is that correct, sir?
There was no knowledge before there was anything to perceive the knowledge.
There is no
If
knowledge
it's not
before
known,
a
it's not
human
knowledge.
brain. Is that correct, sir?
I didn't say human brain.
Okay,
I
sir.
said any
Then what
sentient
brain
perception.
what brain would perceive knowledge?
Hold on.
Any brain that
No,
is
sir.
capable
No,
of
sir.
perception.
Not any brain. There has to be a first brain. What would be the first brain cause of knowledge?
Doesn't have to
What
be
would
a
be the
brain.
first cause of
It doesn't
knowledge, sir? See,
cause-
everything is under
Guys.
cause and
It causes
effect.
knowledge.
Mr. Batman, can we
Yes.
cool it, please? Just
Sure.
hold on.
Knowledge is
let's
subsequent.
no.
Tell
hold
your
on,
boy to
hold
calm
on.
down. It's
Let's
all
not
good.
relax. You too.
Okay.
Let's try not to be so on edge. Let's try to stay on point here, and let's try to
I'm on point.
wait just 1 second before we interrupt the other person, so we don't have to have so much crossover. We have about 8 minutes left. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
If there's a sentient mind that knows something, that piece of information is knowledge. Until it is known, it is not knowledge. That's the very definition of knowledge.
Are there any sentient minds other than human minds, sir?
I don't know. I mean, yeah. There
Wait
are.
a
I
minute,
mean,
sir.
animals have
Then how
sentient
did
minds.
knowledge occur before the human mind? Was there
It did.
knowledge before the human mind?
If there was nothing to perceive it, it wasn't knowledge. It was
How
just
do you know that,
information.
sir?
It's just
Do
data.
you know that?
Yes, because that's the definition of knowledge. That's how
Okay,
that's
have
how
a
we
nice
describe
day.
what knowledge is.
You don't know what knowledge is. So, once again, sir, since we were going to have to come to an impasse on this, let me ask you a question. What is evidence? Would you agree that evidence exists inside of time, space, and matter?
Evidence is any body of facts or data that's positively indicative of and exclusively concordant with one available explanation for a phenomenon. over
Do you
any
mind
other.
speaking a little slower, sir? I happen to have a brain injury, and I cannot
No, we have
understand
eight-
a
we
word
have
you're
eight,
saying.
and I don't doubt that you have a brain injury at all. We
Yes,
have
sir.
8
And I
minutes,
don't mind
yes,
being
I'm gonna
honest
speak
about it,
quickly.
sir. Does it really make you feel better that a brain injured individual like myself is able to thwart your arguments? I'm just asking you
You're
some
not
basic
thwarting anything. You're talking in
questions, sir.
circles.
What is evidence, and what would you
I
consider?
just told
Would
you what
evidence
evidence
be? Yes, sir. And you said it like about a million miles a second. I'm an old person with a
Let
brain
me slay it
injury.
slower for
Would you like
Evidence
to take
is any
a
body
look?
of facts or data.
Thank you, sir. A
Any
body of
body of
facts. Would
facts
these
or
facts
data.
have to exist inside of time, space,
Any
and
body
matter?
of facts
And
or
where does
data
time,
that is
space,
both
and matter come
positively
from? So you
indicative
can know
of-
it
One
to be
second.
true.
We're talking over each
Yes,
other
I know.
again.
I don't think this is going to work.
Any body of facts or data that is positively indicative of and exclusively concordant with one available explanation over any other for a particular phenomenon that we've observed.
Where does your ability to observe things come from, to be able to perceive things outside of the meat capsule of your brain? Would you agree, sir,
My
that in order
senses.
for you to perceive things outside of the meat capsule of your brain, you'd have to have certain necessary preconditions, such as laws of chemistry, laws of biology, and time, space, and matter? Because, see, here's the
No.
problem, sir. You don't seem to accept any evidence, and
a God
every bit
exists,
of
then no.
evidence is evidence for
If
the
a God
living,
exists, the
loving
answer to your
Creator
question
God.
is
See, the
no.
reason it keeps going back to this,
Move
the time,
on.
space,
I
and matter,
answered your
the time,
question.
space,
Guy.
and the time, space, and matter issue
Batman,
is
I
because
answered your
what
question.
causes
Move
evidence
on.
exists
Mr.
inside of
Batman.
time. Hang on a second, I'm not done. What causes evidence
Okay,
to
you have
exist,
about
it
10
exists
seconds.
inside
Yes,
of time,
Yes, he is.
space, and matter.
Batman,
And
I
because of
answered your
time, space, and
question.
matter, you have to have a
Mr.
timeless,
Batman, I'm
spaceless,
going to
immaterial
server mute
creator.
you.
Just do it.
Okay. Okay.
If a God exists, no, we wouldn't need any necessary preconditions because he can do whatever he wants and make
No,
whatever
sir, he
wants.
cannot.
We could.
God cannot create a
Oh, so
rock
he's
so
not
large he
all-powerful.
himself cannot
Fantastic.
mix, sir. Again, you don't understand God. If God can do anything, then he can do no thing. That's basic philosophy.
That's nonsense. That's just talking.
Yes, you have a
If God can
nonsensical
What?
control
argument, sir.
reality, he can-
If your God can do anything, he can do the very thing that could negate his existence. Let me ask you a question, sir. Can your God, can he create a rock so large he himself
I
cannot
don't
move
have a
it?
God.
I know you
have
don't,
a
sir.
God.
But if in your scenario of an all-powerful God, can this all-powerful God, can he create a rock so large that he himself cannot move
I'm
it?
glad that you're doing my work for me and demonstrating the omnipotence
Sir,
paradox.
do
but what
you
I'm talking about is the
understand
ability to
Guy?
control
that this
reality.
God does not exist? Can you answer the question? In your worldview,
No God
does there
exists, but I'm
exist a
pointing out to you
God
that if a
that
God
can
can control
create a
reality-
rock so
Guys,
large he
guys.
himself cannot move it?
I think we're going in circles a little bit.
Yes, we are.
Just a little bit.
He's not letting me answer the question.
So,
Batman.
okay.
Next.
If a God exists and he can control reality, then we would not need to have any necessary preconditions to reality. There would not need to be
Yes,
universal
yes, sir, we
laws
would.
that
Yes, sir, we
allow for
would.
the evolution
And
of-
unfortunately, you don't understand that because you don't seem to get a grip on the reality of the situation, sir. But then again, that's okay. I understand. Next.
Can God
Oh.
create people that aren't dependent on oxygen?
Mind you, we're talking about the Christian worldview and how it corresponds with reality. So
Yes.
let's focus on that a little
Let's
bit.
do that. Let's focus on time,
have
space,
about
and matter because, see, that's
4
where we
minutes
are.
left.
We're in the reality of the situation, which is time, space, and matter. That requires a timeless, spaceless, immaterial, all-powerful, all-knowing, loving, living, logical, lawgiver Elohim, God, who does not
said
change
all-powerful.
over
I thought you
time.
said you couldn't-
Or you don't have
thought you said you
laws that
couldn't do
don't
anything.
change
He's not
over time.
all-powerful.
Hold
You don't
on.
have mathematics that doesn't change over time. You don't have logic that doesn't change over time. You don't have the first cause of love, the first cause of life, the first cause of time, space, and matter. You don't have any of it. And you're having to steal from my Christian worldview to prop up your false one, sir. That's not my problem.
I
I'm
don't
just trying to
assert there
point it
is
out
any
to you.
first cause. I don't assert there is a first cause. I don't believe there needs to be a first cause.
Okay.
Because I don't believe that on a quantum operates in a linear fashion the way that we perceive it, because we know that it doesn't.
Okay, sir, you seem to have some knowledge, but you don't seem to know how you have it. What is knowledge and where does that come from, sir? Can you tell me anything you claim to
I have
know
already
and then
answered
tell
that
me
question
how
ad
you know
nauseam.
it?
I'm not gonna
See,
answer it again.
you keep appealing to your sensory perception, sir. You keep saying, well, I sense it, and because I sense it, I reason that my senses are valid, and then I
How
sense
does
that my
God know
reasoning
anything?
is valid, and you keep going back and forth in this vicious circle,
Batman, how does God know
sir,
anything?
and it's just really not interesting anymore.
Batman, how does
Do
God
you have
know
another argument that maybe is a little less circular?
Batman, how does God know anything?
Does
Batman,
anybody want to address anything that was said during your rebuttal so we can keep this as productive as possible? We have 2 minutes left.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, it's funny that he's trying to talk about the Christian worldview, but he won't give me anything about Christianity. He just wants to talk about a God and then assert that God is his. That's a circular argument. It's completely baseless and it's tantamount to lying. On top of that, he won't answer my questions. He just wants to talk over me because he knows that he can't answer my questions. And if he tries to answer my questions, it'll demonstrate the absurdity of his worldview. Batman, how does God know anything?
Sir, how do you know it's wrong for you to be a pedophile?
Answer
Oh,
his
now he's not gonna
question.
answer. Like I
No,
just said,
That
this
would
is the whole.
help.
This is knowledge, sir. Knowledge is a justified true
Batman, how does
belief.
God know
How
anything?
do you justify that it's true that it's morally wrong
Batman,
for
how
you
does
to
God
be a
know
anything?
pedophile,
Mr.
sir?
Batman?
Because you said it was wrong. It was tantamount to lying from what I was doing.
Mr.
That's
Batman,
Hang on a
please?
second. That's a moral claim. You're telling me I
Please,
did
he's
something
asking
morally
a
wrong. So
question.
why is
He's
it morally
asking
wrong
you
for
a
you to be a
question.
pedophile?
He's asking you a question. If you're not going to answer it, say, I'm not going to answer this question, or at least say you will get to answering his question. Thank
No,
you.
I'm not going to say get to answering my question.
We have 1 minute left, okay? So we're not going to answer questions.
I
with
am answering
questions.
his question. Why is it wrong for you to be a pedophile, sir?
I'm not answering your question.
I know, because you don't have a
You are
reason why it's wrong for you to be a
If you're not gonna
pedophile,
answer my
sir.
question, I'm not
That's
gonna
why you
answer
don't
yours.
want to answer that question. I have a reason why it's absolutely wrong for you and anybody else to be a pedophile. I have an absolute
hurts
moral
kids.
lawgiver God who doesn't change over time. You, sir, could change
Yeah,
your
but he
opinion and
doesn't.
be a pedophile
Hold
tomorrow.
on.
Don't do
Batman.
that.
Batman. There's nothing in the Bible that says don't be a pedophile. I
Actually,
thought
there
you said
is.
you
It's
were
all through the
scriptural.
Bible, sir.
No, there's not.
It's all through the Bible. It's
No,
called the morality
no,
code, sir.
I'm
Do you know what
gonna
the word
hold you-
Wait, hold
pornea
on.
is? Do you know what the word
Batman,
pornea
please.
is?
Mr. Batman, please.
Verse 31, chapter 17 through 19. Kill all the men,
Wait,
kill every boy.
JT.
Oh my
JT,
God.
please.
Yes.
We can stretch this out a little bit longer, but please slow down, both of you.
There's no need to stretch it out. I'm done.
Several passages that endorse pedophilia because it
Nope,
says in
not a
Numbers
single
chapter
one of them,
31,
sir. You're
verse
a liar
17
on your way to
19.
hell, and you need to repent.
Kill all the men, kill all the boys, kill also all the women who've ever known a man by sleeping with him. But all the
Yes, sir. And why, again, is it wrong for you to be a pedophile? If the Bible is not true, then can you tell me why is it wrong for you to be a pedophile? Even materialistically speaking, sir, I used to be an atheist. I could help you with a materialistic argument if you need one.
Batman.
Y'all.
There's nothing in the Bible that says that it is wrong to be a pedophile, and the Bible.
Actually, you
overtly
don't
endorses
understand the
pedophilia.
Bible, sir. That's why I don't try and defend the Bible to heathens like you. I just point out that you can't explain why it's wrong for you to be a
can't defend the
pedophile.
Christian worldview.
Let me ask you a question, sir.
Because
Is
it hurts
pedophilia
kids.
always
Guys,
going to be wrong?
Okay, there's about 15 seconds left,
Yeah, let's go ahead and
and I
just-
don't want you to spend it shouting.
No, that's okay. Let's move on.
If you ask a question, I'm going to answer the question. Do not overtalk me when I answer the question. It is wrong to be a pedophile because it hurts children.
10 seconds.
Morally wrong to do something morally wrong. Once again, your circularity is quite obvious and it's quite
I didn't say
boring.
anything
Do you
about
have an
morality. I said
argument
it is wrong
that
to
doesn't
hurt
actually
kids
go in a
because-
circle all the time, sir? Do you have any arguments that actually are not circular at their very core?
Okay.
It is wrong.
Thank
to be
you.
a pedophile because
JT, you're getting server muted as well. Now, let's